founders who maybe aren't perfectly suited to that next stage often stay, maybe when they shouldn't, or they haven't got the support to stay.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, we're joined by Clare Jones, CEO of Polarsteps, a rapidly growing team building the essential tool for modern-day explorers before, during, and after their trips. Before joining Polarsteps, Clare was CCO at what3words for over 8 years, where she joined in its very early days as a startup and helped to scale them post-Series C. Outside her role at Polarsteps, Clare is an angel investor, backing companies with positive social and environmental missions, and also volunteers with NGOs, working with vulnerable women and refugees in London. I am super excited to welcome Clare onto 40-Minute Mentor today and find out a bit more about her stellar career to date. So a big, warm welcome, Clare, and thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm having a good day. It's nice and sunny, so all good. How are you doing?
I know, we'll take it. Whenever there's sun, it just makes everything a bit better, doesn't it? Well, I'm all good, thank you. And I'm really excited to have you on the podcast because you're relatively new into your role as CEO, and I can't wait to hear all about it. But before we dive into all things Polarsteps in your career, we'll get you warmed up with some kickoff questions. So please finish the following sentences after me. Number 1, success means to me...
having a positive impact on the people around me, whether that's immediate circle or people I work with or people I come across or wider community.
Love that. That's a great answer. And the best day in my career to date was when?
For sure, my first day at Polarsteps. It was a pretty extraordinary day where the team kind of made me feel incredibly welcome. They actually gave me a beautiful tree as a welcome present to go in a new place in Amsterdam. And it was a really beautiful moment where this team who'd built this business welcomed someone in who was new, and it was a really special day.
Wow. And I've never heard of anyone giving a tree on their first date. That is an amazing gift. And we'll talk a bit more about coming into a business at scale as CEO. That's a unique position to be in. So it's I could imagine that was quite a daunting day. So we'll explore that further. One piece of advice I'd give to my younger self is...
seek feedback. It's one of the things I had to learn. I remember for a very long time feeling very defensive whenever I found someone would give me feedback, and then sort of having to practice seeing it as data, seeing it as useful, seeing it as actually a privilege. If someone's giving you feedback, that means they want to help you be better. And learning that, I think, a bit earlier, I think would have helped me improve much quicker at the beginning of my 20s.
That's great advice. And I think that's probably something myself and others can really resonate with. I think it's very easy to feel attacked or defensive when someone gives you feedback, but actually it's often, and it should be coming from a good place to make you better. And I think there's also a great skill in how you deliver feedback as well. And that's something that I think everyone should learn, so it lands in the way, or is received in the way that it's meant. Final quickfire question. My biggest failure to date is...
My work failures are pretty much always where I haven't brought someone along with me. I haven't been able to get them on the journey. But I think my biggest failure in life is inability to follow recipes. I would like to be better at following recipes. I can cook by taste and I can cook by sort of improvisation. I have yet, I think, to successfully follow a recipe, which means I can't bake anything. So that is one thing I would like to improve in my life, is the ability to follow a recipe without getting distracted partway through and changing it, and successfully make a cake.
Okay, so if we can crack that one, we might see you on Great British Bake Off or something like that. Oh, do you know what? That is so interesting you say that, because I'm terrible at following instructions. Even we have HelloFresh, and it's laid out in front of me, and I still manage to butcher it because I know what's coming, and then it's like, how is that split? Or so I can totally relate to that. Thank you so much, Clare. Really great start, and I can't wait to dive into your career. But let's start at the very beginning, if you don't mind. Tell us a bit about your upbringing. What did you want to be when you were growing up? Would love to learn a bit more about how it has shaped the person you are today.
Yeah, so I've got 3 sisters, so grew up in a very loud house with lots going on at any point, so kind of 6 of us around meal tables. My mum was a teacher and my dad stayed at home to raise us, which at that point was a little more unusual. It's still pretty unusual actually now, but then even more so. So I had the very lucky experience of having a dad stay at home while we were at school and to be that person at home. It was a pretty activist-y household, so there was a lot of discussion of kind of politics and activism at the table. There was a kitchen table that was kind of the center point of the house. So we kind of grew up with this mission of kind of impact in the world was something that was always part of, our parents took us to protest marches and we would go and do charity things together. And it was a really important part of our upbringing. So although very briefly, when I was very little, I wanted to be an archaeologist, I quite quickly switched then to wanting to work in kind of NGOs and do something NGO related in the world. Had a big old hippie phase in my kind of teenage years where you'd wear the rainbows and go on the CND marches and have T-shirts with slogans and that kind of thing. So that was my grounding was very much in that kind of liberal, progressive, activisty household where there was just constant conversation, discussion, debate at the table around food.
Wow, amazing. Sounds like a really interesting upbringing in there. And I can already see how the early part of your career was sort of shaped from the dinner table. You got your master's in philosophy and then spent those sort of foundational career years working in the charity and NGO sector. So your sort of early ambitions came to fruition. Tell us a bit more about what those experiences were like and the sorts of foundational skills that you sort of developed in those early years of your career.
So I think the NGO thing was a really important part of my life. I think it positioned a lot of my thinking in a way that I really benefited from. I also discovered I wasn't a very good frontline worker. So I really thought I was going to go and work in NGOs. And I actually initially was working a lot with women who'd been trafficked. And I basically came out of it with the utmost respect for frontline workers, social workers, NGO workers, because I just was not good at that job. I just found it incredibly tough. I found it the level of resilience that you had to have. And I was working, and particularly in that role, I was working around these amazing women who would basically carry huge trauma burdens for clients. And they would be fighting with them on their legal battles or finding them housing through kind of massive pain. And they would be able to help them and lift them up and come back the next day with energy and passion and do it again. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me because I really thought I would be able to do that. And I really couldn't. I really just didn't have the resilience that you need to be able to do that kind of frontline work. And it was honestly, it's the thing that I think has been one of the most important things I did was get exposure to that work, realize I couldn't do it. And I think that level of respect that gave me for anyone in community work that's frontline, I think that's been a really important learning for me. And when I think about charity donations and things like that, it's really shaped how I think about that because these people are extraordinary. But it was a bit of a shock to me, actually, that I wasn't good at that work. It felt so obvious. I'd be like, great, I'll go and do this kind of work and it will be living the things that I believe in. I then had to rethink a bit and realize, actually, I'm not very good at this, which means I'm not doing justice to the people I'm supposed to be working with. And I feel like I'm not having an impact because I wanted to have an impact and I felt like I wasn't. And I was probably not being as net positive as I wanted to. And then I thought, what's a different way to do this? Is there a way? So, for example, I could do volunteering where it's less every day, right? So there's ways to volunteer. So since then, I've been working with a homeless centre called Spires in South London, and I do a voluntary shift with them. It's a night shift, but it's not every day. It varies with my travel schedule. It started being every Monday, and then as I started traveling, it's been various Mondays when I'm in the country, but it's a night shift, and that's been something I've done actually longer than any job I've had, has been working this night shift in Streatham. So we work with women who are sex workers on the street, so usually street homeless, sometimes in hostels, and working with them. And that, for me, is a thing I can manage. I can manage it and hopefully I'm helpful, but that's partly because I'm a volunteer. I'm with a support worker who actually knows what they're doing. So they're there, they have all the training, they have their decision-making power. I'm just sort of there to be helpful and on hand and just be company in the van. And that helps me a lot, which is I get to do something, but it's not every day. And I still get exposure to frontline work. So yeah, that whole period in my life was a real learning period for me. And then I kind of shifted more into, okay, so what can I do in my job that's good for the world in a way that I'm still valuable? And then in philanthropy or through volunteering, there are other ways I can be helpful to these amazing people who can be brilliant support workers and help them differently rather than it being a full-time job.
Got it. Really interesting. And it's funny, isn't it, how we have our mindset on one thing and we think it's going to be, everything. And just sometimes that isn't the case, but it's incredible how that almost realization can then lead into another career, a pivot that ends up being incredibly successful, which is exactly what happened with you. So I guess continuing the story, in 2015, you joined what3words as their chief commercial officer. I'm sure pretty much everyone listening to this will know about what3words, but why did you join the business when you did? And if someone listening hasn't heard of the business, tell us a bit more about what it does.
So I found what3words because I was in kind of startup world, and I couldn't not join because I was absolutely obsessed with the idea. It was just one of those things where when you hear it, and so if anyone who doesn't know what3words, essentially there are lots of places that don't have addresses, or the addresses aren't good enough. So your doorstep probably doesn't have an address. Your building might. I'm actually right now talking in a block of flats that has 3 different entrances and 1 postcode, and the drivers who are delivering things go to various different entrances. So what3words, basically we divided the world into 57 trillion squares, labeled each square, which is 3 meters by 3 meters, with 3 dictionary words. So you can say, meet me at left clown pasta, and that might be an entrance, it might be a doorstep, it might be a spot in a park, it might be a place with a beautiful waterfall. So every square in the world has a unique address. So I thought the idea was really beautiful, it was really elegant. Luckily for me, it was really early stage, so that was really fun, getting to jump on something before anyone's heard of it. Yeah, I didn't meet anyone in my life who'd heard of it at that point. I'd kind of seen it in tech world, and being able to jump in at that early on that beautiful an idea was basically an absolute joy. And I think I would have done pretty much any job to get to work at what3words at that point in my career. I was just completely obsessed with the idea, and the team were great. It was an early days, but everybody who was already there was pretty extraordinary, and it was an amazing moment and one of the best things I did in my life.
Yeah, oh, amazing. I mean, it's such a unique concept, such a brilliant concept, and you hear all these incredible stories of how what3words has saved people's lives and been like so impactful. So yeah, I can imagine getting in there early must have been incredible. I guess you mentioned you're in this sort of startup ecosystem already. Tell us a bit about how you made that transition from kind of being in NGOs and the charities sort of space to the startup world. Was there anything that really surprised you or that you wish you'd have known before you made that pivot?
So actually, it was a really easy transition because I discovered social enterprise as a thing. And social enterprise is a really nice bridge from NGOs and community work into businesses that do good in the world. And so that was a really lovely bridge, which was basically this idea that has been around for a very long time, of course, this idea that you can do good while doing business. And what3words was a great example of that because, as you said, people are using it all the time to get rescued. NGOs have the whole time I've been there at what3words, you were hearing from NGOs. There'd be people who'd said, we've just used it for the recovery in Haiti after a disaster. There'd be people using it in refugee camps. One of the best days at what3words for me was we woke up and it was during the Afghanistan rescues, and a guy had tweeted basically saying something along the lines of, I don't know who invented what3words and for what purpose, but it saved so many lives in Afghanistan. And that thing of we were just asleep, right? We were just asleep. And overnight, these incredible rescue workers were using the technology for free to save people's lives. And that's the same every time you hear about someone using it in a township where people don't have addresses to reach women in labor, or someone using it in a refugee camp, any of those things. Actually, I mean, even to the point, my grandfather once had a fall and used what3words on an emergency call to tell the ambulance where to come. So there's this huge level of impact, whether it's small and individual for a person that you love, or it's huge and at scale for reaching people who don't have addresses. And I think that is a really powerful thing that I hope will stick with me always, which is that you can have these amazing businesses that actually have a positive impact in the world, and that the world is better because they exist. And it's such a privilege to work in an environment like that.
Yeah, totally. Well, what3words, as we've said, has become this household brand. It's become such a great scaling story. But you obviously joined really early. So tell us a bit about some of the biggest lessons you learned through that scaling business. I'm sure there are going to be people listening to this that are hoping to emulate that sort of scale. And I guess particularly, so the lessons learned would be amazing, but also the hardest challenges that you had to solve, in your tenure there.
So I think one of the lessons, and I'm glad to have learned this now going back a stage and going back to an earlier company. So I'm glad to now know this, having gone through it, was about communication, and that you have to actively change how you communicate when the company gets bigger. And that seems obvious, but it's something that I think it certainly took me by surprise, because at the beginning, everything feels so organic. Everybody is in one room. I mean, we were at the beginning of what3words, we didn't have meeting rooms. So we had these like call center microphones. So we would all sit on a table, having calls at the same time. So you would hear everything. You knew everything that was going on. We had, one or two developers in the corner who didn't love having to hear everything that was going on when they were trying to code. But you absorbed what was happening in the business because you didn't have 10 meeting rooms where everyone could go and have secret calls. And it was just this tiny group, and you could go out for lunch and you'd all be on a table. And information just traveled. You didn't have to think about information moving, it just traveled. And then once you reach 50, it was still like a really small company vibe. It still somehow information worked. And there was, of course, some more thoughtfulness. But then once you get to 80 and 100, things really start to change. And I think the thing then is really understanding that the organization, you owe it to the organization to communicate well about what you're doing, what the decisions are, how decisions are made, and things that you didn't have to do at the beginning because you were just a small team and you could all get on with things and things just happen organically. Having to really think, okay, we're going to have a Tuesday all hands every week. What are we going to do in it? And we actually were joined at that point in business by someone called Tom Bowl, and he came from a much bigger environment, and he was able to come in and be like, right, this is how we structure our comms, we think about this, we're going to take it seriously. Like a Tuesday meeting when you've got 150 people and everybody is there, that is 150 hours of company time. So we are going to practice the presentations we do on a Tuesday. We're not going to just come in and speak to people and not treat it seriously. We're going to practice, and we're going to make sure that we are using people's time wisely and thinking about the messaging and thinking about what we're doing. And that was a really big lesson for me of how much communication has to change if you're going to bring people along with you on that journey, and that you have a responsibility to do that. And it can't just be, well, I just wish people knew what was going on. Right? As a leader, you've got to be intentionally communicating in ways that work for the people around you. So that was one. I think the big challenges were times when it wasn't going as well as it is now. So what3words is now, of course, I mean, as you said, people just know it. It's been an absolute joy seeing that business take off and getting to at the beginning when I'd said, I'm going to join this startup, what3words, and people would say, what are you doing? You're leaving a proper job to go and work in a startup no one's ever heard of, and this is crazy. And of course it was then a while before everybody started to know. And then, I mean, one of my favorite moments was at a dinner party a few years ago when someone explained it to me. He was like, oh, there's this amazing company, what3words, and then he explained it to me, and I was like, okay, this has reached a certain level of adoption. But before that level of consumer adoption, of course, there were moments in the business where you didn't know it was going to work, right? You didn't know it was going to take off and that everybody was going to start using it, and that you'd be able to use it to get your DHL deliveries and with emergency services and all of those other ways you can use it now. And I think the challenge is keeping the belief, because actually what3words strategy hasn't changed massively over the years. It took a lot of belief, and it took a lot to say, we believe that this is a brilliant thing, and if we can find ways to show it to people, they will use it. And that is what happened in the end. But it didn't seem obvious all the time that was going to be the case. You kind of had to believe it, and you had to go along with it. And Chris, the CEO, actually, of course, had to bring investors along, investors who'd invest in the business. They had to also keep believing in it and take that long-term view. And of course, in the end, it's wonderful to see it everywhere and see it really taking off and all these big deals and everything. But keeping the belief in those moments before it takes off, I think, was a big challenge. And I think we all had to learn how to help people stay motivated. During COVID, you could see the consumer numbers drop because everybody was not going outside and using what3words anymore because they were sitting inside. But then you build on that, and we actually did this amazing pivot where the whole sales team worked on e-com and deliveries, and then we ended up building an entire sector out based on deliveries to doorsteps, because during COVID suddenly it mattered loads that they would find your door. So it was always that kind of how to keep the belief even when things aren't going to plan, or they are going to plan, but it's just a very long plan that takes a while to work. So yeah, those were some of the challenging moments.
Great advice. One of the founder of a company called Chipper Cash, which is a unicorn, came on the podcast, and he talked about the importance of delayed gratification, because in the startup world, whatever anyone thinks, it is a grind. And that's one of the things that I find is so inspiring about early founding teams and founders that have this big, bold ambition and dream. But they know that it's going to take a lot of hard work together. And often from the outside, you just see the kind of the raises and the exits. But actually, to get there, there's so many knockbacks, and there's so many times where you probably think this isn't going to work. I guess on that point, Claire, I'd love to ask your opinion on how actually did you keep the belief internally? What were on those really dark days where customer numbers dropped or just something went terribly wrong? What tactics for founders listening who might be going through a really rough time right now, what can they do to kind of rally the troops and keep everyone focused on the longer term sort of ambition?
So I think, it's a mixture always, right? But a big thing that I think helped us was that we had this wonderful team of people who were lighthearted about the pain. And actually, we had a guy, Alex, who was a fantastic team member for a long time, and he set up a channel on Slack basically designed around pain sharing. So when something went terribly wrong, and especially because at what3words you travel a lot if you're in the business development team. So there was loads of traveling and stuff would just go horribly wrong and your flight would get diverted and you'd have to take a 10-hour bus and you hadn't eaten and then you'd get there and the client might cancel the meeting or, there was all kinds of things that could go wrong. And Alex set up this channel and it was this amazing place where you didn't realize how much it mattered to have a place for everyone to just give you an outpouring of sympathy and probably make fun of you and make you laugh when something went wrong. And it was this tiny thing to say, let's just have a Slack channel, the OMG channel. And actually, it was a really powerful way of just going, we're here with you. And so if something went wrong that someone didn't expect with a deal or with a customer or just with a trip or something, you could just share it in there and all your colleagues would rally around you and you'd get cascades of emojis and responses. And it would just be this really beautiful way of saying, we're all in this together. We're all going to laugh about this. Like we're doing something big and it's sometimes really painful. And it was, those are, I think, examples of things you can do, which seem small, but actually just tap into this thing of, as you said, it's a grind. Startup world is hard. It is tough. But if you have people around you to make you laugh and feel like you're in the trenches together, that makes such a difference.
Before you hear even more pocket-sized mentorship, I wanted to share some very exciting news with you all. This episode of 40-Minute Mentor is brought to you by Amplified Group, the people services group that supports technology companies from inception to IPO. Together, the group combines the leading brands in the people, talent, culture, and HR space to provide the services founders and leadership teams need to build high-performing teams and businesses. You may have already heard the news, but JBM has recently joined Amplified alongside Foundation Partners and Unleashed to offer a more holistic people and talent solution. So if you're a founder or people leader, then please make sure you check out Amplified on www.amplifiedgroup.com or drop the JBM team a line on info@jbmc.co.uk. We'd love to tell you more about this very exciting chapter. Now, back to today's 40-Minute Mentor.
And I guess for people listening that may have just joined a startup, hoping to become the next what3words, what advice do you have just starting out on this journey?
Brace yourself. It's going to be longer and harder than you expect. I think that it's easy to look in, as you said, from the outside and go, wow, what an adventure. And it is an adventure. Oh my goodness, it's an adventure. But I think the important thing if you're doing a startup journey is to go, am I going to be okay with this if it fails? And am I going to have enough adventures and learn enough and grow enough as a person along the way so that I'm okay with failure? Because there may be failure. And going in knowing I'm okay with that, I'm going to learn, I'm going to have an adventure, I'm going to explore this amazing thing with all these brilliant people, and I will become a totally different person the other side of it in a good way. If you're okay with that and you're braced for that as a possibility, I think it helps you relax into that ride and be okay, because it is a big old roller coaster.
Yeah.
And you really do have to brace yourself for the ups and the downs. So being prepared for the downs and also the risk of failure, I think is a really important part of being able to keep going and push through when things are really hard.
Yeah, great advice. And all I would say is that I think I learned more in the first 6 months of starting JBM and running it than I did in the previous 3.5 years of sort of corporate and a career, just because you're so exposed to so many different things and it just forces you to pick things up. So I would say if you're embracing the startup, you're clearly entrepreneurial to some extent. It might not be the long-term move for you. You might find you're better suited to other environments, but you will learn a lot from it. And I think that should give anyone confidence that might be going through maybe a bit of a difficult time in their early sort of startup career. I wanted to talk about being a CCO, or Chief Commercial Officer, because that was your role there. What did that mean on a day-to-day basis? And I'm assuming this changed dramatically from the early days to the later ones. But can you give us a flavour of what being a CCO in a business like that actually entailed?
So it was always a mixture of different things, and that was why it was so fun. I'm a person who's very bored very easily, and I was never bored because each day you would be doing a mixture of, you might be doing one-to-ones with your team, you might be doing client calls, you might be working on a contract. So, I might get up and have 2 or 3 meetings, and then I might work on a contract for a couple of hours. I would usually be collaborating with someone else. So the lovely thing about that role is it's a very stakeholder management type role in that you get to work with the marketing team, you get to work with the legal team, you get to work with the ops team. You're basically constantly working with other teams. You work with the product team, you work with the tech team. So that was a really nice thing, was being that kind of center point for lots of different touch points with the team. So it would always be a mixture of internal and external. It would usually have some client calls and meetings in there. Of course, in a very early startup, you're doing lots more FaceTime with clients and so on. But as you grow, it also was really important to me to keep doing those big deals because number one, I loved it. It was really fun and exciting. But number two, if you're asking the team to do it, it's really important you're alongside them doing it. So you're not asking the team to ever do something that you're not willing to do yourself. So being there, and that might be joining a call if they wanted an extra person to join the call. It might be doing your own calls. And it was also doing lots of outbound. It's the thing that I think people maybe don't think that you need to do as a company grows, but I would sit there and I would source my own meetings because, again, if I'm going to ask the team to do it, I should be willing to do it. And so it was a whole range of things and any day, but it would certainly involve at least half an hour of messaging people on LinkedIn at any point to try and build up our profile and get more customers and reach people. And it worked really well. Like over the years, we had amazing customers from all kinds of industries and these amazing relationships that we just got to build from reaching out to people.
That's really great to hear. And I think important advice. I think when you become at the C level, there's still a lot of that kind of, probably you would say, boring sort of outbound. Like you've got to be still very hands-on, especially in a startup. You've got to you got to lead by example and get stuck in. I think that's great to hear. I guess we're headhunters in the tech space and we do tons of go-to-market executive search. So we've seen this kind of evolution of the CCO role in recent years. Lots of our clients have been running these searches right now, actually. So why do you think having a CCO is so crucial for sort of scaling businesses? And for anyone that's listening to this aspiring to that position, what skills and experience do you think makes a really great one?
So I think in a B2B environment, having somebody who is at the table who represents the customer is important from that perspective, someone who's actually talking to the customer. So there are lots of different perspectives, but being able to come back having just had a meeting with the customer is a really valuable perspective, I think. But it also allows the sales team or the commercial team, the BD team, to feel represented at that level. We actually at what3words were really lucky in that we were really fully embraced by the other teams. It was this really beautiful environment where the sales team felt absolutely taken care of by everyone else, but that's not always the case. And I think if you don't have somebody at the management table who is representing you, it can just feel really hard because you're doing really hard stuff. You're out there, you're grinding all the time. Sometimes you're having to work really late and you're sitting there in an empty office having a call with someone on the west coast of the US, or you're traveling and you're exhausted and you've been traveling for 5 weeks straight. And if you're not embraced by the company, I think that can feel really hard. So I think that, it's a really valuable role and it's an important way of making the voice of the commercial team be heard and helping them be seen by other bits of the business. And then for skills and experiences that make a good CCO, I think, number one, openness to feedback. I think I got much, much better once I learned to listen and to be patient and to hear from people more. So I think that if you're going to be in any kind of leadership role, being open to hearing and improving. And look, I hope I got much better. There are things that I would have done really differently if I could go back and do them again with all the learning I have now. So openness to feedback, willingness to just put yourself out there and talk to people. Because I loved what3words so much, I was very able to tell everybody about it. I wasn't ever shy about jumping next to someone at a conference and telling them about it because I was so proud of it. So choose a product that you're proud of and that you love, and then you will be able to tell anybody about it. And also just constantly invest in that network and that relationship. It was much easier for us in later years than it was in early years because we knew everyone and people knew us and they told each other about us, and it became this really nice network effect, even in B2B world. And that was really helpful. So be that kind of willingness to put yourself out there and network, which is made easier if you're in love with the product.
Love that. Thank you so much. We are now in August 2024, and only a few months ago in June, you made this very exciting move to become CEO at Polarsteps. So tell us more about how that move came about and what really stood out to you about such an exciting opportunity.
It was a big surprise to me and everybody I know that I left what3words because I had been there a long time. I'd been there from the beginning, but Polarsteps just hooked me. The founders of the business, because the founders themselves had decided to bring in a CEO. No one had forced them to. This wasn't a bunch of investors saying you must bring in a new CEO. They themselves had decided, wow, this company is really growing. We would like a CEO to take us through the next stage. And that made for a really special experience because these were people who'd built an unbelievable product. Again, fall in love with the product. This product, and the amazing thing for me was that the more and more I used it as a user, the more I was like, oh, I think I'm going to have to be here. Like just the more I used it, the more I fell in love. So as a user, great. There was a product that I could fall in love with and be proud of again. But also, this was a really special group of people who had built something truly extraordinary, and it really, really is an extraordinary business, but also were able to be introspective enough and to say, you know what, there is a massive growth potential here, but we don't think we're the people to be in the leadership CEO role to take it forward. Now they're still in the leadership of the company, they're still involved as product founders, they get to build and do what they're incredible at, which is build this incredible product, but they wanted to bring someone in. And that's a really special thing, I think, which you don't always see. Sometimes at kind of series A, B, C stage, founders who maybe aren't perfectly suited to that next stage often stay, maybe when they shouldn't, or they haven't got the support to stay. And this was a really wonderful thing of founders saying, we are so excited about what this could be, and we'd like to bring someone in to complement and to work with us to do that. And so that was something really special. And then every moment after that I had a conversation with anyone in the team, I would come away being, wow, there's a word in a lot of those kind of culture books and things of talent density. The talent density of this company is so amazing that every person you walk into a room with, you come away with your brain exhausted because it's been so fun to talk to them and learn from them. And that is a really fun thing to get to do. And especially for me, I'd been at what3words a long time. I was certainly excited about a new adventure, and to go and meet these people and just think, oh my goodness, I want to be like a sponge and just absorb everything that you all know. That was a really fun experience during that recruitment phase.
Can totally understand why you took the job. What a great kind of validation of the move based on the caliber of the team and how self-aware the founders are. I think that's an incredible trait, and it's not an easy thing to do, to walk away from your baby. And I think we are currently running a very similar search for a founder that's kind of got to the point where they've realized it's time to step aside. I just have huge admiration for any founder. So if any founders are listening to this that want to talk about that, I think it's an increasing, I think because of COVID, because of the recession, it's been a bruising time for founders. And there's absolutely no shame in going, actually, the bit I loved was the building phase. There are amazing professional CEOs out there, or people that are just able to take us to the next scale of growth. And I hope there'll be more people that are willing to do that proactively rather than getting moved aside by VCs, which is often what happens when they aren't quite able to see the wood from the trees and realize it's the right thing to do for everyone. So it's great that the founders of Polarsteps saw that.
Yeah, I think as well, a part of it is also for these founders, they are amazing product people. Their vision is extraordinary. The way that they think about the product is amazing. And if you're not the CEO, you have more time to do that. There is more time to do the thing, which is build this beautiful, incredible product if you're able to be the CTO, right? If you're able to be the CTO instead of the CEO and the CTO, you get to spend that time building. And even in the last few weeks, having seen what is happening in our company with our incredible CTO, who was an amazing CEO in the interim period, he was incredible at it, but seeing what he is doing now, he's able to be CTO as his main job again. It's incredible. And basically, if there are founders who are thinking about it, I think that's the thing to remember.
It's brilliant.
If you are incredible at product or tech or being a CTO or being a CPO, there is the chance to get to do that and see the company still grow. And that's a really special thing.
Yeah, focus on what you love. It's a really privileged position to be at a place where you can hand over the bits of the job you feel you're not as good at or don't enjoy, and actually get back to doing what you love and what you're best at. So that's a win-win, isn't it? I guess we've kind of teased our audience about Polarsteps, but we haven't actually shared what it is. So tell us a bit about the origin story of the business, kind of how it's evolved and what it is today.
So Polarsteps started in the middle of the Atlantic. So one of the founders was in the middle of the Atlantic and thinking, wouldn't it be great while I was on this amazing adventure sailing to be able to share with my friends and family what I'm doing without having to WhatsApp everybody, right? Or send everybody a message to be like, this is what I've done today. And so designed the early prototype of Polarsteps, what's become now Polarsteps. And essentially, this is the tool, the kind of go-to place for you if you're a traveler. And there's kind of different phases of your journey, right? There's your planning phase, which is, where should I go? What should I do? You've then got the next phase, which is like, on my journey, I would like to show everybody what I'm doing. I would like to be able to share photos and videos and journal entries. not with everyone in the world. We're not asking everybody to be travel influencers, but with your friends and family. I'd like to be able to show my friends and family where I am. I've climbed this amazing mountain. Yesterday, I went to this tiny village and had this incredible local food, and all of these things. So during your trip, you want to kind of track it and share it with friends and family. And then after your trip, wouldn't it be lovely to be able to relive it, to see it on a map, to see everywhere I walk, to see my photos and my videos, and maybe even physically, for example, you could record that in a photo book and you could have that physically to remember your travels. So across that journey, you've got the planning, you've got the tracking, and then you've got the reliving of your journey. Wouldn't it be really nice if there was one place that you could do that you could share your photos and you could plan your trip and you could know exactly where you might like to go and do that all in one place rather than have to go to the various different places, go to a Google Doc to plan and then maybe share something on Instagram, but then also share it on WhatsApp with other people and have all these disparate fragmented places. Wouldn't it be great to just have one place where you could plan your trip, track it, and then relive it afterwards?
Perfect. And so who are the perfect customers for Polarsteps?
Oh, well, the lucky thing is lots of people who like to go on adventures in the world. So anybody who likes to adventure or explore. So people who use Polarsteps are not usually people who fly and just go to a resort and then come home. They probably don't need Polarsteps. But if anybody who is going, we like to call it multi-destination travel. So if you are going, and it could be you might be going on a massive epic hike that takes 3 weeks along the Appalachian Mountains, sure. But it might also be you're going to Italy and you're going to visit 5 different little villages and you're going to explore them and you're going to go and spend time with the locals and explore, the local landscapes and the small towns and the cities on the way. So it's multi-destination travelers, people who like to explore. And that can be big epic trips, but it can also be weekend trips. So I just used it to track my trip to the Olympics. So I went on the train from Amsterdam to Paris for the Olympics, and then I came on the train to London, and it was just a little weekend trip, but I was able to share everything I saw on the way. I can share that, people can see what I'm up to, I can have that as a memory. And then of course over time, the wonderful thing is over time you get to see all of these amazing adventures you've had over. So I've now, because you can track trips you have taken in the past, so you can use the photos on your phone and say automatically track my trips. So I now get to look at all the trips I've taken in the last 15 years on a globe, and I can spin it around and I can see all these beautiful places I visited and get to relive that experience and share it with other people. That's the other lovely thing, is being able to say, when someone says to me, I'd like to go to Mexico, I'm thinking of going to Baja California, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to send you my trip. You can see all the incredible things that I did. There's this hidden pool that you would never know, but it's hidden partway through the mountains and it's hot and you can swim in it in the middle of the day and go and visit there. And so that's the amazing thing, is being able to have these adventures and then share them with other people who want to explore the world.
Love that. Such a cool idea. And I am certain you're going to get lots more customers off the back of this, which is great. I guess just to put it in context of size and scale in terms of the business, but can you give us a few sort of metrics or just, extra crunchy detail so our listeners can understand what you've inherited?
Yeah, so I have the absolute joy of inheriting a business that's really taking off, which is a very special experience. You get to come in and at the point at which it is already taken off and it is really growing really fast. So just as I was joining, we were announcing we'd hit 10 million users. And that's 10 million registered travelers who are out there using Polarsteps in the world. And that is an amazing thing. And the incredible thing is 99% of those users came through a referral from another. So that's word of mouth. That's amazing. That's not through marketing. That is through users saying to each other, follow my Polarsteps trip. Come and do a Polarsteps trip with me. Track my trip, follow my trip, do your own trip. So users bringing users has brought us that kind of community of 10 million travelers. It's mostly European at the moment. So the Netherlands is a market that, absolutely incredible to me. I was looking for a flat in the Netherlands, and people, when you're sort of making small talk, when you're meeting the estate agent, and they'll say, what do you do? And I say, I work at Polarsteps. And they go, oh my goodness. And they would get their phone out and show you their holiday they just tracked. And I don't think I've met a person in where I've been telling them about my job in the Netherlands who doesn't know Polarsteps, which is incredible. So it's really, really taken off in the Dutch market. It's increasingly taken off in France, Germany, places like that. And finally getting to see the places in the UK where people have heard of it too, which is exciting. I was actually wearing a Polarsteps t-shirt I had the other day, and a woman excitedly grabbed her friend and said, oh, I've got that app. So it's coming in other places, but it's really growing, particularly in Europe. We're also looking at the US, where we're seeing some really interesting early signs. So yeah, it's early in the rest of the world, but we know how to do it because it's got 10 million users organically. We know what to do. We know how to scale it. And now it's really about getting everyone else in the world to hear about it as well.
Love that. Wow. Very exciting times ahead for you, and particularly given that this is your first CEO role. So tell us a bit more about what that actually means in terms of scope of your role, and what is your big vision for the business now you're in the seat?
I think the thing about being a CEO in a company where you're joining it when it's going really well, I think a lot of your job is for a long time to just try and listen to people because they know what they're doing. So just for me, it's been coming in and hearing from these incredible experts. And that is across product, it's across tech, it's across our community and support team. I mean, the community and support team very generously let me sit with them and answer customer inquiries. And that was an incredibly valuable experience, not just because you get to hear from customers who, even when they're reporting maybe something that isn't going right for them in the app, they're usually saying, I love this app. Thank you so much for making it. Here's a tiny suggestion for a change, which is a total joy. But also seeing the team in action and sitting with that community and support team and the level of care that they give to every single customer who gets in touch. And these are people, a lot of these people, they're using a free app, which is used to track their adventures, and the level of love and care and attention and dedication that team have was incredible. So that's just one example, right? Which is my job as a new CEO in a company that is working so well, is to come in, listen, see what's going well, to understand more about what is the secret sauce. Why is this company doing so well? See how beautifully they've built this company. I mean, really, this is a Series A company that honestly behaves in the way it is run like a Series C company. It is so well run. They have this incredible person who's in charge of that called Sasha. And Sasha has been a huge part of basically creating this incredibly grown-up company. Even though it's at Series A stage, it behaves so well. Everybody is so talented. It's got such good process, which is perfect for me because it means if we are going to scale it, the foundations are really built. And that is one where I think if someone is going into a growth phase, find yourself a Sasha, make sure that early days you've got someone who has built these foundations. So if you are going to inject capital, if you're going to inject serious growth, so, we're talking about 10 million users today, we're talking about 100 million users not very far from now, make sure that you have those foundations. And so my job basically at the moment seems to be listen to people, learn what's going right. Hopefully, I think, help get the right people in the room. I think that's partly a CEO's job, is to get the right people in the room and make sure that they're all asking each other the right questions when they're making a decision. And sometimes it's prioritizing and helping us decide what to do. That's kind of leading into your second question of where are we going? So at the moment, we're best in class for track and relive. So the millions of users who are using it, I mean, honestly, like the absolute joy of at the moment, which is the summer where everyone's traveling. And we see in our office, we've got a little map where we can see anyone who has a public trip. So that's one that's shared publicly. We can see it pop up. And that's amazing as well, because you can see throughout the day. Asia, when we wake up, Asia's full of little photos and things. And then as the day progresses, it progresses across the globe. Very cool. And so there's all of that, and we're seeing that. And so we're best in class for that. But we're also now launching some amazing planning features. And this allows people to not just say, I'm going to go here, follow my trip. This is allowing people to go, you know what, I'd like to go to Costa Rica. What should I do in Costa Rica? We've got an incredible editorial team who work on that guides experience. So if I am going, you know what, I'd like to go to the Philippines, what should I be doing in the Philippines? They've curated this content to explain exactly what these kind of travelers, these multi-destination travelers, people who want to explore responsibly, people who want to behave well while they're there and discover the local culture, that's what they're able to point you towards. So that's kind of inspiring you on your journey. We're now launching, and some out now and more to come, some amazing planning tools to really make it that one anchor point for your journey. You go, I'd like to think about where I'd like to go, I'd like to plan my trip, I'd like to track it and really become that anchor point. So our growth is now going to be not just increasing those millions and millions of users who are using it already, but building new parts of the tool to really make it that go-to place.
Incredible. Sounds so exciting. And I guess we've sort of alluded to the kind of how good the founders are and how self-aware they are to know to bring you in as CEO. But it's historically been, it's not always the easiest thing to take over from founders, and coming in as an incoming CEO when there's kind of maybe when it's never been a CEO before, or just that it's just where the founders have currently been in that seat. So what has been your experience of working with the founders in these early months? And what advice do you have, or what do you think makes or breaks kind of a successful transition?
So another good example of this is that the founders have asked for help externally while planning this. So not just working with Eravina for the search, they also have been working with a lady called Anna, who is really experienced in tech and scale-ups and startups. And she actually helped them design my onboarding. So they were able to go out and say, you know what, we want some help for people who've done this before, who've successfully transitioned. So Max, who was the CEO and CTO and is now CTO, Max kind of did this really structured onboarding, which was amazing, and absolutely highly recommend doing structured onboarding, because for me, I just got to come in and be taught loads of things and get to sit with everyone and learn. And that was fantastic. But it was also a journey of kind of here's what the first few weeks, this is just going to be, okay, you don't need to do anything, you just need to learn and listen and absorb. And then over time, we've sort of had a real structured plan for handing over decision making. What's the point at which we're starting to say, okay, this is decision making handover? So I think a big thing is absolutely ask for advice and get input from people who've done this. Design with structure, that's definitely been it. But the biggest part of it with all the founders has been their openness and kindness to me, which is they understand that they have done this for nearly a decade. They know this business inside out, and I know absolutely nothing. So I don't know why decisions have been made, and they have been given me so much time and so much patience. And so, for example, one of the other founders, Kuhn, he is very focused on product, but he gives me 2 hours every week, and I just ask him questions and he just answers them. And it's one of the most valuable pieces, right? So I get to sit there and I just like, why do we do that? And why do we track this? And what does that metric mean? And can you show me that graph from 5 years ago? Because I need the history of the business to be able to understand going forward where we're going to go. So that's an example of it. The other thing is that they embraced me as a human being. So I've had to go and move countries for this job. So I'm spending most of my time now in Amsterdam, and all of them invited me to their homes. All the founders in the business invited me to have dinner with their families. And that seems like a small thing, but that is such a huge thing, because it is saying, we understand you are a human being who's coming on this journey with us, and we're embracing you. And so I got to have dinner with Max and his amazing family and meet his kids. And that was also a really important part of the onboarding, because it didn't make me just feel like I've just come to be a colleague. It made me feel like they care about me as a person and they want me to see their whole lives.
Sounds incredible. And that is the best possible advice for anyone going through this transition or bringing in an executive, particularly a CEO. That extra care and thought, I think, will make such a difference, to make somebody feel welcomed in what is such a critical commercially, but such an important role for the business. It makes total sense to invest extra time and really make them feel the love, and because you'll feel so much more at home quicker, and that's really what you need to be able to come in and do the job that you've been hired to do. So I think that is absolutely brilliant. We're sadly running out of time, Claire. And finally, our 2 wrap-up questions. This is 40-minute mentors, so I have to ask, if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
So I would say my great-grandmother, who was this absolutely extraordinary woman, she is an absolute firecracker, who I actually was lucky enough to have her till late in my teens. I had this amazing great-grandmother, and she grew up in a world where women weren't necessarily pursuing careers and doing things like this. And she basically was this whip smart person. She was fantastic at puzzles and crosswords and all these kinds of things. And yet she was whip smart, and she also built this beautiful family, and she built this beautiful home. And I would like to have had a chance as an adult to learn from her about how she grew up in this world where women weren't necessarily encouraged to be this kind of whip smart type person that she was, what she'd learned from that. And yeah, so if my option is to have someone dead or alive, I would choose my great grandmother, Valerie, who I would love to have learned more from. And I wish that as a teenager, I'd asked her more questions, or I would have loved to get to know her as an adult when I could learn from her.
Yes. And that's really just great advice for anyone that, with parents and grandparents. It's like, you ask them questions. There's so much that I regret not asking my grandparents. And I think, you only have them for so long. And I think it's really important to soak up that wisdom. So that's a beautiful answer. Finally, what is the last piece of career advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Be patient. I took a long time to learn patience, and I thought for a long time, I thought it was a race, and I had to get there at all costs, and I didn't sleep, and at times I got really sick, and I sacrificed time with people I love very much for things that in the end could have probably waited a day or a week or sometimes a month or a year. So I would say anyone who is, especially if you are a natural ambitious person who wants to have massive impact in the world, it's okay. There is time. Life is long. And so be patient along the journey as well.
Really great advice, Claire. Thank you so much. I've absolutely loved our conversation. I've learned tons. I'm buzzing to download the Polarsteps app. And yeah, I'm sure with you at the helm, they've got a very exciting future. So wishing you all the very best for it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story and your mentorship with our listeners.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.